Let's today talk about compassion. And what's so interesting about compassion is that when we are compassionate, that is, when we think about the welfare of others, be it material or spiritual welfare, we're happy. We're happier thinking about others than we are thinking about ourselves. For example, I've asked thousands and thousands of people, if we offered you $500 to go shopping for yourself, or $500 to go shopping to then bring what you buy into a poor neighborhood, necessities, food, clothes, and so forth, what would make you happier? Everyone says, 100% of the people say, I would be much happier serving others. So the feeling of service gives us so much pleasure, so much more pleasure than acquisition for ourselves. And that's what compassion is all about. And what we find is that when we think of others' needs, even though we have problems, because we're thinking how to solve other people's problems, we just tend to forget our own problems. Somehow or other, our own problems become insignificant in light of the fact that other people have much worse problems than we have. What are our big problems? Oh, I missed the sale, or the product I wanted sold out, or I was late for this. Not usually huge problems that we have that upset us. But there's a lot of people that have a lot of big problems. And when you try to help them, somehow or other, you forget about your problems. There was one lady who was depressed. She went to a psychologist, and the psychologist said, just go into the poor part of town and find people to serve. That will make you happy. So that's what compassion is all about. It's about giving, it's about serving, it's about selflessness. And that's our nature as spiritual beings. We're servants. All the sacred teachings say that as souls, we're servants. And as servants, it's natural for us to give and give and give. Although our material conditioned mind thinks if I give, I'll lose. But actually, we get so much more by giving. So, to end this idea of compassion, understand that everyone in this world is going through difficulty. Everyone in this world is going through anxiety. And just like you go through difficulty, you go through anxiety, you can relate, you can understand the anxiety and difficulty others are going through. And so when you see people, just have this thought, they're also going through difficulty, they're also going through trouble. Maybe I could pray for them. Maybe I could think about that difficulty, maybe I could do something about it. And if more of us think that way, then the world's going to be a better place. Myself, I became a monk when I was 19, and my job, my compassion was to give spiritual knowledge, to help heal these wounds in the heart that people were experiencing over and over again in their frustrations within their attempts to be happy. That was my greatest pleasure, to be able to give people knowledge, give people meditation practices by which they became peaceful, by which their problems were solved, by which they became happy from within. That was a far greater feeling than I ever possibly could have achieved by acquiring anything material for myself. So I think this is a really important point, that as we develop virtues, that's actually how we become happy. And people think they can buy happiness. It's an illusion. You gain happiness through your virtues, through your acts, through your spiritual elevation and purification, not through acquisition of material things. It doesn't work that way. Today I want to talk about one of my favorite topics, perhaps one of my pet peeves, something that really upsets me, which is social conditioning, materialism, and consumerism. Now, when we look at modern society, we can see every decade the next generation is a little different than the previous generation. Why? Well, that has a lot to do with media, what that generation is growing up seeing on media. Now, it's not just television as it was when I was young, with about 3 main channels and a few peripheral channels. Now, basically, you can see thousands of things on TV that I could never see when I was young. And that's socially conditioning us, giving us stereotypes that this is what a man should be, This is what a woman should be. This is what is considered beautiful. This is how you, ladies, this is how you should look. This is the kind of body you should have. Men, this is how you should look. This is the kind of body you should have. And then men, you start thinking, oh, this is the kind of body women should have. And women start thinking, this is the kind of body men should have. That's just one thing which we all can see that's obvious. What about all the other things? So I think a good way of understanding this, as I said, is we go back and we look at generations in the past. And let's imagine we grew up 100 years ago. There's no television, there's only movies. Movies are just starting, and newspapers, a few magazines. How different would we be? Well, we would be a lot different because there's different culture. We would have different values, different beliefs. We would be different people, obviously. So that helps us understand how conditioned we are, how who we are is not really exactly who we are, not entirely anyway, but it's how we've been conditioned. So I think it's very important to start here and understand this. It is said we're ingesting thousands and thousands of ads every day. Could be an ad on a bus, on a t-shirt, or just what somebody is wearing, what somebody says, what to speak of all the ads we're getting through social media and radio and television and magazines and newspapers. So we're bombarded with images, and these images are saying you should have this, or you're not good enough, or if you don't have this, something's wrong with you. And you might think, well, it's not really affecting me, but it all goes in there. As I say, well, if you're older than 5, you've been affected by it. Because we're bombarded. We're bombarded by what the media wants us to believe. Now, the media is in business to make money. The movie industry is in business to make money. So do they really care how they're affecting us? Well, obviously, some do, but do the big broadcasting companies really care? Obviously, the bottom line is money, and what sells is what they'll feed us, even though it may be bad for us, it may be bad for our children, or if you don't have children, when you do have children, you have to realize, look at the world you're going to raise them in, look at the influence that's going to affect them. And so I just wanted to make us all more acutely aware of how much we're being affected by media, how much our thinking is not our thinking, but it's programmed in there by people who want us or are forcing us to think in a certain way, especially because it will make us purchase, it will make us shop, it will make us think in a way that we spend money. Okay, just a figure. This is not, I'm not faulting anyone, but the average woman, at least in America, spends $12,000 to $15,000 per year on cosmetics. Now, how did that happen? Well, cosmetic industry spent millions, perhaps billions of dollars on advertising to get women to want to look a certain way and believe that they can look this way and believe that if they look this way, they will be accepted, they will be appreciated, and ultimately they will be loved by some man. And if they don't look this way, perhaps no man will ever love them. And that's sad. It's very sad. So I could go on for hours on this topic. Just wanted to lay a few seeds of this idea that really look at your conditioning, look at how you're responding, look at what you're doing, and start to consider how much of that is actually what you want to do and how much of that has been conditioned by society. Drinking, smoking, this, that, and the next thing. We weren't born with these desires, but we've been conditioned to think this way. I think you know this, but I like to bring out things that you know and kind of zoom in on them and talk about them so that we can kind of reflect on these things and go more deeply. And you'll find as you go more deeply, there's a lot there that we can learn about ourselves and how we're conditioning that can really help us change our lives and help us become more intentional about where we want to go. And hopefully where you want to go is up, not down. You want to raise your consciousness, you want to become more spiritual. And that's what we're all about. Yoga, reconnecting, divine connection. Today I want to talk about humility. I know it's not a topic that a lot of people talk about. It's not something a lot of people think about, but it's foundational to spiritual practice. It's also necessary to understand the difference between humility and low self-esteem. And it's also necessary to understand that perhaps the way we define humility is not really correct, and that's why some of us might be afraid of it. A lot of people feel that if I'm humble, I'll be taken advantage of. And that's not really what it means to be humble. In fact, Mahatma Gandhi said humility is a great strength. It's very difficult to be without ego. It's very difficult to always be the well-wisher and always want to serve others, always want to give. That's part of humility. It takes a lot of strength to see your own fault and not become depressed by it, but actually become inspired to be better. That's an aspect of humility. It takes a lot of strength not to stick to the idea that I'm always right and fight for that, when in fact you're not even listening to the other point of view. That takes a lot of strength. It takes a lot of objectivity, or neutrality, balance. A lot of people can't do that. To be able to hear another person's perspective, that requires humility. And what about low self-esteem? What is low self-esteem and how is it different from humility? Well, humility actually is a spiritual quality which is uplifting and inspiring. We know low self-esteem is not uplifting and it's not inspiring. So humility means reality. I can see things as they are. I can see myself as I am. I can face myself as I am. And I can work on myself to improve. I don't have an inflated concept of myself. That's called arrogance. I have a very realistic concept. I'm willing to acknowledge my faults. I can listen to people when they give feedback. That's amazing. How many people are able to listen well to feedback? That's what humility means. And another very beautiful aspect of humility is to understand where my capabilities, intelligence, good qualities, and abilities come from, and not to become proud of them and not to use them to garner my reputation or garner acknowledgement from others. Whatever we have comes from Him. He's given it to us to use for Him. That's humility. It's understanding where it comes from. When we don't understand where it comes from, that's called ego. And then we grab it and say, well, look how great I am, look how smart I am. And then we try to utilize that to move ahead materially, maybe even to step on people, maybe to get people to applaud us. Whereas spiritually, we want to be persons who can give more and more from the heart, from a humble position, knowing where our power comes from. My spiritual revolutionary t-shirt on, and so I thought, what better day than to talk about what it means to be a spiritual revolutionary. Spiritual revolutionary means that you understand change in the world will happen when we change inside. You understand that what's happening outside is a reflection of what's happening inside. You understand that laws alone, external revolutions, are not sufficient unless people themselves change. Because laws, obviously, they can restrict people, but not necessarily change people. Even the prison system with all its punishments and hardships and austerities doesn't necessarily change people. There are processes which actually change people's consciousness, which uplift people, make people better, help them overcome their challenges, help them overcome their character defects, help them overcome their addictions. So if we want to get better, we have to start inside. If we want the world to get better, we have to start inside, because when we change, we affect other people. I think it was Martin Luther King who said, first sweep your doorstep, clean your own house, and if everybody does that, we'll have a very clean world. There's always a tendency to point the finger at someone, to blame someone for either our problems or social problems or political problems, and obviously there are people to blame. But as Mother Teresa said, when she was asked, what's the problem with the world? She said, well, the problem with the world is that I'm a sinner. So that's a very, of course, a Catholic view, but basically what she's saying, if we want to put it in a more of a secular language, the problem with the world is that I need to be better. The problem with the world is I can be better. I can be better than I am now. And if I am better, that's what's going to help the world the most. So if you and I get better, the world's going to get better. That's the way a spiritual revolutionary thinks. And so to finish this talk with the thought, we want to make the point, probably you realize this, that the real revolution is a revolution of consciousness. It's not a political revolution. It doesn't come through war. Of course, demonstrations, protesting, and so forth sometimes is effective and sometimes is necessary. But the real revolution is going to be on the level of consciousness, when you and I and everyone we contact elevates their consciousness, purifies their consciousness, spiritualizes their consciousness, changes their consciousness, then the world is going to change dramatically. And we all know if that doesn't happen, the world is not going to get better. And it's a serious thought of where the world is going and where it might be in the next 20, 30, or 50 years. Of course, in some ways it will be better. But I think we can all agree in some other ways it's going to be much worse unless we begin the spiritual revolution. Today I want to talk about humility. It's not something that a lot of us talk about, but I think it's very important to talk about it because really what humility means is just the opposite of ego. We all know what ego is about. A person artificially feels that they're better than others when actually nobody's better than anybody. I may have more intelligence than you. You may have more ability in a certain area than me. You may understand science, I understand math. But where do those abilities come from? They're not ours, they're gifts. And when we recognize those are gifts, that's humility. And then we can use those gifts in service to others, rather than use those gifts to garner recognition from others, garner applause, or misuse it to exploit others. So humility is related to a concept which we're familiar with called empowerment. Because every power we have is given to us. And so spiritual humility means recognition of that power. Spiritual humility also means reality. It means recognizing who we are and where we're at. I have faults, you have faults. It's not always easy to see them, especially when people tell us. But if humility means reality, the reality is we have faults, and there's no advantage to ignoring them. But if we can face those faults, if we can acknowledge them, this is where I'm at, and be inspired to improve myself, that is humility. And that's what we want. And low self-esteem means to see those faults, to think those faults are worse than they are, and to become discouraged by those faults. Arrogance means to see myself and think I'm way better than I am. Neither of those help us. But humility simply means acknowledgement of where I'm at and accepting it and working on improving myself. Now, a big aspect of humility is not showing off or not doing things to get acknowledgement or praise or appreciation from others. So I have a question for you. When you go out in the world, what do you want people to believe about you? And what do you do to get them to believe that? You want people to think you're intelligent, you want people to think you're funny, you want people to think you're cool, you want people to think you're a fashionable person, a beautiful person, a nice person, a spiritual person. What do you want them to believe, and what do you do to get them to believe that? And then the next question, which is even more important, is what do you doubt about yourself that you need people to believe that about you? In other words, do you doubt you're intelligent or fashionable or smart or spiritual or whatever, and you need people to validate you? as a beautiful, beautiful meditation, and I'd like you all to think about it. And in ending, just be yourself, it's okay. And today, be a little better than you were yesterday. Tomorrow, be a little better than you were yesterday. And every day, do yoga. Yoga means come closer to your source. Today, I want to talk about how often people control us. There's a story of a yogi. He sees a scorpion in a pond, maybe 50 yards. And the scorpion can't live in the pond, so he thinks, well, let me pick up the scorpion and take him out of the pond, otherwise he's going to die. So he picks up the scorpion bites him. So he throws the scorpion. Natural reaction, right, when you're bitten. And obviously he must have known the scorpion was going to bite him, but anyway, he took a chance. But the interesting thing is he picked up the scorpion again, and again the scorpion bit him, and he did it again and again until he got the scorpion out of the water. And so a man was watching him, and he was very interested in what was going on in the mind of this yogi. A yogi is also traditionally in India very elevated person. They're also known as sadhus. A sadhu is like what you would call in the West as a saint, a very pure person, pure-hearted. And so this person who saw him knew something special was going on in his mind, and he asked him, he said, why did you do that? I saw you were getting bitten again and again and again. And the yogi said, yes, I was. He said, but the scorpion was teaching me a lesson. The scorpion was biting me even though I was helping him. And I thought, well, I, by nature, should help people, should help all living entities. And so even though the scorpion's biting me, it's my nature to help. So why should I give up my nature to help if the scorpion won't give up his nature to bite even though I'm helping? Interesting, right? What was his understanding? His understanding was, it's my nature to be a certain way, and even though someone's biting me, I shouldn't allow them to affect my nature. Now let's look at our lives. We have values. We have principles which we hope or wish to live by. But often people bite us, and then we degrade from our values and principles, and we react in the wrong way. We may become angry or jealous or resentful. We may do something that we wouldn't intentionally decide to do, but circumstantially we do. And if we look at our life, we can see how often we are controlled by the behavior of others. And now the big mistake is that sometimes when people behave this way, we blame them for our behavior. You can't blame anyone for how you behave. Look at Lord Jesus. He was crucified, and he was praying for the people who were crucifying them. To God, crucifying him, to God to forgive them. That's amazing. Now, how would you feel if you were being crucified and you're innocent? How would you feel towards the government? How would you feel towards the people who are attempting to kill you? We all know how we would feel. Very angry, very resentful. And if we survived, most of us would want to get back and in some way return the favor. But when we're elevating ourselves spiritually, we have to live within the integrity of our own beliefs and return unkindness with kindness. Is it difficult? Of course it is. Is it right? Yes. What are the ramifications of doing that? They're amazing. Will you be happier? Will you elevate yourself? Yes. And therefore, I always say that even though it's easy to respond in a negative way, ultimately it's harder than responding in the right way, because the ramifications of that are so bad for us and bad for the world. If we want to make the world better, we have to start with ourselves. We have to elevate ourselves, because we can't make the world better if we remain low, if we remain bad. So we have to learn how to respond from a higher consciousness, and we always have that choice. As difficult as it may be, we have that choice to respond with compassion or empathy or kindness or forgiveness or whatever it is. Or we have the choice to respond with anger or jealousy or envy or hatred or whatever. And we always have to remember that's our choice. And the other thing we need to remember is, do we want to live a life which is controlled by the actions and words of others? Or do we want to live a life which is intentional, that we're living the way we want to live, we're being the way we want to be? There's a beautiful saying. When you resent someone, or you hate someone, or you criticize someone for their bad behavior, you are allowing their bad behavior to harm you. You are punishing yourself for their bad behavior. And how often do we do this? Too often. And this is what spiritual life means. It means to live in integrity with the nature of our higher consciousness, our higher being, our spiritual being, and in connection with our source. All of that is higher, 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 transcendental, above the material. There's a beautiful, beautiful saying by a former slave who then was raised to a government position. He was asked by his fellow African Americans, how can you work with these white people? They enslave you, they enslave your parents, your grandparents, and so forth. And he said, I will never allow any man to I will never allow any man to degrade my soul by causing me to hate him. So beautiful saying, I will not degrade myself because of the behavior of another. Nelson Mandela, when he was getting out of prison, said, I knew when I walked out, if I didn't forgive the people who imprisoned me, I would be walking out of prison, but I still would be in prison. So don't imprison yourself by reacting negatively because of the misbehavior of another person. Respond from a higher level of being. You will be happy, you will make others happy, and you will make the world a better place. I want to talk about self-acceptance. This is such an important topic. Look at our society. Look at what we look at as success. Certain shape body, certain weight, certain job, certain financial bracket, certain kind of face, muscles, figure, label, neighborhood, car. So it's no wonder a lot of people feel bad about themselves when they compare themselves to others. Now you may have heard this before, that you should not compare yourself to others, you should only compare yourself to yourself. Try to be a little better than you were yesterday. So I want to give you some sacred wisdom, ancient wisdom from India. I've studied this for almost 50 years, and I've lived in India for about 10. And what Indian life is, or traditional life perhaps everywhere in the world, was that you work according to your nature, what you like to do and what you're good at. And it's not about status. If you're a potter, that's fine. If you're a seamstress, that's fine. If you're a cook, that's fine. Nobody's so much worried about position. They're more worried about working according to their nature, because they know two things. If I work according to my nature, what I do, I will do well. But more importantly, I'll be happy. And some of the biggest causes of misery is trying to be someone we're not, trying to work as someone we're not, to get recognition, to get some kind of position so people will honor and praise us. And that's a false kind of honor and praise. We shouldn't want it, and it causes us a lot of suffering. So then when we start to look at these kinds of success, this is what success looks like, then we may think, well, I don't have that, and we don't feel good about ourselves, when in fact, we're fine. What I would suggest, if you want to look at success, you should look at success in a broader sense, not just in this life, but how have you come to this life? Where have you come from? And what ultimately is the highest purpose of life? The highest purpose is not to die with the most toys. The highest purpose, as a friend of mine said, you work so hard, and in the end of your life you're so sick, and you become the sickest man in the graveyard. Or you also become the sickest and richest man in the graveyard. So that's not the goal. The goal is to elevate our consciousness, spiritual connection, which is what yoga means, spiritual realization, self-realization. That's the purpose. That's why we're here. And we can evaluate our success by how we're progressing from where we are today to where we are next week and next week and next week. And there's no right or wrong in this. It's just progression. And if you progress spiritually, that's real success. If you progress materially, it doesn't necessarily mean you're a better person. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be happy. it doesn't necessarily mean you've lived a successful life. It just means that materially you're successful. But where does that success lead you? Ultimately, we get old and we die, and we can't take anything with us. But what we do take with us is our consciousness, our spiritual advancement, that we take with us. It's such an interesting concept. Many of you have heard of reincarnation, many of you may have studied it. But what you may not realize is that although when we take on a new incarnation, although we get a new body, we don't get a new mind. We get the same mind. So whatever we've cultivated in this life in terms of our virtues, character, consciousness, qualities, characteristics, we take that with us. So although we say you don't take anything with you when you go, you don't take anything materially with you, but you take your spiritual evolvement and you take your conscious evolvement with you. Isn't that interesting? So the progress we make in this life will continue into the future. You also take your karma with you. So any bad things you've done, the reactions are going to come to you. Any good things you've done, the reactions will come to you also. So put things in that perspective. And then self-acceptance can be much easier. Okay, the last thing I want to say about self-acceptance, you are where you are right now. So learn to accept that. Don't denigrate yourself. Don't belittle yourself. But try to be better. Try to be the best you can be. And if you're trying to be the best you can be, that's the best you can be. And so why would you denigrate yourself if you can today be the best version of yourself that you've ever been? And it doesn't have to be compared to anyone. Because if you compare it to others, there's always someone who's going to be a lot better than you, who could potentially make you feel really bad about yourself. Right? So, you don't need to feel bad about yourself because that won't help anything. You need to be self-accepting, self-loving, and from that platform, you can progress, either materially or spiritually. Any way you're going, if there's not some sufficient level of self-acceptance, you undermine your progress. So this is really important. I think today, the way the world is, this is super important because there's so many people telling us this is what it means to be successful, but that's not success at all. It's an illusion of success. Success means be better than you were yesterday. Be a better person. Help other people be a better person. Elevate your consciousness. Elevate yourself spiritually. So I wanted to talk about trying to control, especially trying to control other people. And it's so interesting. It is said that we want others to change, but we don't want to change ourselves. We want to see others change. And you know how difficult it is to change yourself. Why would you expect others to change? And really, we're the only person we can change. So oftentimes we do something very stupid. We try to control situations or people we can't change, and we avoid trying to control or change the things we can. Now, if you think about what you control, and you think hard about it, you'll realize that you think you control things that you don't. And if you think hard about what you don't control, you will realize there's things that you don't control you could actually control, or you actually should control, which is basically yourself. So control issues are a big problem, both psychologically and spiritually, because there's so many things we can't control. He is the one who can control everything, not us. We can control some things, and unfortunately, even the things we can control, sometimes we don't, and we foolishly try to control the things we can't control, and we frustrate ourselves, we frustrate other people. If you want to be happy, you're going to have to learn how to accept what you can't change. You're going to have to learn how to accept what you can't control. You're going to have to learn how to accept things about yourself the way they are now. Maybe they can be better in the future, but right now this is how they are and you can't change them. And as soon as you accept that, you're peaceful. As soon as you accept the nature of other people and that they're going to act a certain way, even though you don't like it, you immediately calm down because you don't have to try to change them. You can allow them to be who they are. You can allow yourself to be who you are. You can allow situations which you cannot change in the present moment to be as they are, and then immediately you just calm down and you become peaceful. Otherwise, you're going to go crazy all the time trying to change things you can't change in an attempt to do something that's impossible without the realization of what you're doing, without standing back and saying, wait a minute, can I actually do anything about this? I'm frustrated with it, I want to change it, but I can't. So why don't I just detach? That's a great spiritual principle that we all need to learn to do a little better than we're doing now. I often speak to people about the hole in the heart and how we're all trying to fill that hole with stuff, with success, with fame, with sex, drugs, rock and roll, whatever it is, we're just trying to fill it. It's a constant effort. We're always doing it. And we see that even people who are successful at filling the hole still feel unfulfilled. Try saying that. Still feel unfulfilled. Why? Because that's not what's missing. What's missing is the spiritual. And if you meditate properly, if you chant properly, while you're chanting, you will feel that this is what the heart is hankering for. This is what I've always wanted. You will feel a sense of coming home, a sense of deep satisfaction that you can't get from anything else. A sense of, this is it. This is what I've been searching for. Not only in this life, but this is what I've been searching for in thousands of lives, millions of lives of reincarnation again and again, looking to fill that hole. Now, my spiritual master said, a very interesting thought, he said, in every life you've tried to fill that hole and you're unsuccessful. That's why you're here. That's why you've incarnated in this body. Because you're still trying to fill that hole and you haven't yet found out how to fill it. And don't you think that after all those lifetimes you would have figured it out if you actually could do it? And that's just proof that it can't be done materially. We've tried in so many ways. Why continue to try? It's a waste of energy. But chanting, it's said in a Sanskrit prayer, it lets us taste the nectar, the spiritual juice for which we are all anxious, for which we hanker at the deepest core of our being. And that's how I often feel when I chant. I feel like I'm in a desert and I'm watering my soul at the deepest level, and the soul is just drinking and drinking and drinking, and the soul is saying, yes, yes, this is what I want, this is what I need. And I've lived in very simple conditions without very much, but experienced amazing, deep satisfaction, happiness, realization, so many things. Practically had nothing, but I had the mantra. And so I came to understand the mantra is the most valuable thing I have. It was given to me freely, but actually it's the most valuable thing I have in my possession. I could lose everything I have and I'd be okay, as long as I had the mantra. But if I lost the mantra, to me that would be everything. So it's such a valuable thing. Keep chanting, keep doing it, keep trying to improve, and allow yourself to just drench your soul in this nectar, this ambrosia, spiritual ambrosia, and gradually, more and more, you will feel that the hole you're trying to fill starts to fill up more and more and more. You know, a popular question is, if I evolve myself spiritually, will that solve my material problems, my emotional problems, and my psychological problems? And the answer is maybe. Because really, we need to be balanced physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And sometimes, if we just focus on the spiritual, we actually get out of balance psychologically or physically. Or if we just focus on the physical, we get out of balance emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually. We are holistic beings, so if we just focus on one aspect of our lives, it can throw us out of balance. Now, it is true that many things fall into place when we evolve spiritually, but it's also true if we evolve spiritually and don't maintain a certain level of stability on the physical and emotional level, it can impact our spiritual life in a negative way, and obviously impact us physically and emotionally in a negative way. So, do we need to take care of our emotional, psychological, physical life? Yes. Will spiritual life help that? Yes. Will it solve a lot of those problems? Some of them. Maybe for some of you it will solve all of them, but for some of you it won't. There are issues that it will help you with, but you'll still need to work on them. Now, what I've seen, because I've been teaching and practicing spirituality for almost 5 decades, I've seen that people who are a little bit out of balance or a lot out of balance materially and psychologically have more difficulty in their spiritual lives. And people who are out of balance spiritually, then I would say their lives are empty, even though materially they're successful. So what I teach is something I call whole beings philosophy, or whole being intelligence. What I mean by the whole being, don't just focus on one aspect of your life. And this is a lot of people do. They're really into the physical and then very little spiritual, or they're really into the spiritual. They neglect their mental or their physical well-being. Another thing that's interesting is that the spiritual, or the soul, it existed before we had the body, and it exists after we leave this body, or we give up this body. So definitely the spiritual is most important, because that's what continues, that's who we are. Definitely more important than the physical and the material. And our society makes a huge mistake in giving much more emphasis on the physical, emotional level of life and neglecting the spiritual. So just as you would exercise daily, drink a lot of water, take care of yourself, try to be emotionally healthy. Sometimes you have to talk about your emotions, go to therapy and so forth. Similarly, we should give equal energy to the spiritual. I would say give more than most people, just give a little bit. But every day we should give time to meditating, to studying, to discussing, to writing our realizations, to praying and so forth. Because if we don't do that, then our lives are out of balance. We're giving so much energy to the physical, and the physical doesn't remain. It doesn't stay with us. But we, as the soul, we continue after the demise of the body. So doesn't it make sense to give more energy to spiritual pursuits? Yes, it does. So my point is, yes, we should give more energy to spiritual pursuits, but we shouldn't neglect the physical, emotional, mental aspects of our life. So I want to tell you a beautiful story about happiness. And of course, we all know that you can't buy happiness, and having things is not really what it's about. It's more about being a better person, having better relationships, being more spiritually evolved. That's what actually makes us happy. But even though we know that, we're very accustomed or conditioned or habituated to think, well, if I just have this or that, I'll be happy. So I want to tell you a story that illustrates the fact that that's not true. And this takes place in India, and I do tours of India. Maybe someday you can come with me and I can actually show you this personally, what I'm telling you about. We take people into Indian villages. And in Indian villages, people live very simply. They don't have much. And we take people into the homes of people who don't have much. And the homes means basically a small room for some of them, where a family of 3 or 4 or 5 live in a room maybe 12 feet by 12 feet. And they hang their things in the rafters, and they have a little backyard. And so we went to visit one village, and I invited myself into the home of these people, because any of these people will let you come into their home. They're so happy to see foreigners, and they're so gracious. So I said, let's go into this home. They'll be happy that we come in. So we walked into the home, and then we walked through the home. We walked into a little backyard where they had their water pump. The backyard is just basically mud. That's also their kitchen, because they dig holes in the ground, they put coal in it, and then they put their pots on top of that. And those people were so happy to see us, and so gracious, and so warm, and so welcoming. And so after we did that, and we met other people in the village who also had very little, but were so happy, so satisfied, and so happy to see us, I said, so what happened for you there? And so many people said that I've never seen smiles on the faces of people like that, even in the wealthy neighborhoods of America. But their hearts were so warm, their smiles were so bright, they were so genuinely happy and loving. I've never seen people like that. And what's so amazing is that by our standards, they should be quite unhappy based on how they're living, what they have, or should I say what they don't have. By our standards, they should be unhappy. By our personal standards, we would think if I lived that way, I would be unhappy. But to see the warmth, the satisfaction, the genuine simplicity and happiness of these people who have so little, it says more than anything any book can say. Because you feel it, you see it, and it's so wonderful. When you feel and see something that you believe, but your belief is more in your head than in your heart, and then it gets transferred to your heart. It's an experience. And you can't forget that experience because it's so real, it's so genuine. Now, to add on to this story, a little icing on the cake, I grew up in a neighborhood which was about, let's say, a mile or a mile and a half from Beverly Hills. So as you probably know, Beverly Hills is a very wealthy neighborhood. And just north of Beverly Hills is an even wealthier neighborhood called Bel Air. So when I was 16, I worked for a drugstore, and the drugstore would deliver to people in Beverly Hills and Bel Air. We would call in, I want some toothpaste, I want a hairbrush, add my prescription, give me a washcloth, and then they would give me the address and I would go there. So I had firsthand experience of Beverly Hills. I also had friends in Beverly Hills. I also went to parties in Beverly Hills. I also did many things in Beverly Hills because it's pretty much where I lived. So I have a lot of experience with people in Beverly Hills. And I can honestly say the people in those villages in India were genuinely happier than the people in Beverly Hills and the people in Bel Air. Of course, people in Beverly Hills were more comfortable, but they weren't happier. I can vouch for that. I can testify for that from personal experience. So I just wanted to share this with you, and maybe someday we can all go together to India and I can show this to you. We're outside here. This is where I live. I live on 5 acres. There's a forest over here, forest behind me, a little forest over here, and you can hear all these crickets. And I love to speak outside. It's easier for me, but I think it's also easier for you to hear, because nature is nature. We are part of nature. And when we're in nature, we just feel natural, right? And so we've created these cities which are so unnatural, and they do very strange things to us. And I've seen this, I'm sure you've seen it also. When you get out of the city, you get into nature, it's like you become a different person, isn't it? You feel differently, you calm down, the stress levels change, just everything changes. I lived in a village in India, and I know many, many people who have lived there. And when we live there, it's like we're different people in that environment. We're just so much more spiritually elevated. And when we get into the city, it tends to degrade us in certain ways. It tends to make us the kind of people we don't want to be. So it's really important to be in nature. Now, according to teachings of Bhagavad-Gita and the Indian philosophy, nature is called mode of goodness. When you're in nature, you're in mode of goodness. It's technically called sattva. And it has a very special effect on you. And you know that effect that it has on you. You've experienced it. And you know that effect the city has on you, the stress of the city. You know that effect. And you know, like, if you go stay up late at a bar or a club, you know, that's a different kind of mood. So what the Bhagavad-Gita teaches is that there's different environments in this world, and according to the environment we step into, we get affected by it. And this effect we don't have a lot of control over unless we can, through meditation and spiritual practice, transcend it. But if we can't transcend, then we're going to get affected by that environment. So what kind of environment, if we're going to get affected by, do we want to be infected by? It's called sattva, goodness, because that's elevating. And so if you step into a certain environment where there are spiritual people, where there's chanting of mantras, where there's temples, where there's nature, you automatically are transformed in a way in which you don't have to do anything. It's just by being there, you go up. If you meet elevated spiritual people, just by being in their presence, you go up. It works the other way. If you're around people with low consciousness, you don't have to do anything. That consciousness will pull you down. So those who are practicing spiritual life, who want to practice spiritual life, want to be in an environment which is going to be uplifting, because we're weak individuals and we get affected. All of us. This is just the way it is. So if we want to go up, then we have to put ourselves in environments that will inspire us to go up. And we have to be very careful about allowing ourselves to be in environments which may trigger actions, thoughts, words that are degrading. Words, actions, thoughts we don't want to say or do or think. But environment can cause that. So when you want to evolve yourself spiritually, this is a very important thought. In Sanskrit, it's called sangha, association. What do you want to associate with? You want to associate with those things that will help you, enrich your heart, enrich your consciousness, enrich your life. And you want to avoid those things that will bring you down, that will take you away from that. And don't think you're so strong that you can be in any environment and not be affected by it. That will happen later on a more elevated stage. But now, we have to realize we're very affected by our environment. So pick environments that are nurturing, that are uplifting, that are helping you. And if you notice environments which can include people, friends, so-called, that's not having good effect on you, then you're going to have to distance yourself, because their frequency, their vibration, will have a very bad effect on you. And I know sometimes this is hard because you have friendships, but they're not good, and you're attached, but you realize it's not helpful. You have to make these tough decisions. If you want to progress on a spiritual path, you have to make some demarcation, because of our present weakness. We become so much affected by it. And the last thought, maybe some of you know this. If you're in a 12-step program, let's say an alcoholics program, I've never been in, but I've been told, and I've read some of the literature, that they tell you that from this point you have to go dry, cold turkey, and you cannot ever take one drop of alcohol, because if you do, it will trigger the desire. So in the same way, if you're evolving spiritually, there may be things you need to leave behind, and you can't associate with people who do those things. You can't have those things around you, because it will trigger you to do the things that you've given up, that you want to give up, that you've told yourself you don't want to do, and you're happy you're not doing. It will trigger you to do that, because the desire is still there. So you have to be really careful. This is really, really important, because if you do this well, you'll make it easy on your life, and your spiritual progress will happen naturally. Okay. I would like to share with you something about forgiveness. I've taught forgiveness workshops for about 15 years, and something I've seen that's amazing. I see on Friday night when people come in, they're very concerned that they're not going to be able to forgive, or they're concerned that they have to face it. It's kind of a dark time. You see it on their face, you see it in their body. Sunday night, it's amazing what happens. When they let that resentment go, their faces light up, their bodies light up, and what I see is that weight and darkness has just been lifted out of their body. That's the visual that I see. I'm not trying to explain this scientifically. I'm just telling you, I'm just sharing with you what I see. They become lighter. You can see that this negative emotion was weighing them down. I'm talking about light physically, and also light in terms of their color. They're brighter. You can see on their face. It's like some disease, or it's like a ghost has just left them. And therefore, because I've seen that, probably I've taught this course 50 times, so because I've seen that over the years, again and again and again, I can't stress how important it is for all of us to let go of resentment, because it's so toxic, it's so heavy, it's such a huge burden on us. It's actually killing us. It's killing us physically, it's killing us emotionally, and it's killing us spiritually. You don't need it. It has no value for you. And all we're getting is some kind of perverted satisfaction where we can be a scapegoat or a martyr, or we don't have to be responsible. We can make excuses. We can get back. We can leverage ourselves against somebody. Why would you want to do that at the expense of destroying yourself? So as I taught forgiveness and I studied it, I started to list all the benefits you get by forgiving. It's amazing what happens when you forgive. It's like this example comes to my mind. You have a wheel, and there's all these spokes connected to the wheel. The center of the wheel, the hub, is forgiveness. And so many virtues are connected with forgiving. It's amazing what it does to your life. So I'm just imploring you, if you have any issues of resentment, and we all do, some of us deny that we do, but we all do. A lot of us have many, we don't even know it. We've suppressed it so well, or we've denied it so well, that we don't even realize it. But it's working on us, it's affecting us right now. And so I implore you, if you have any issues of resentment, you want to be able to let it go, whether you can do it today or tomorrow, or if you need help, we have online courses to help you do this systematically, to help you let it go. And once you let it go, you will think, why did I ever hold on to that? That was the stupidest thing I could have ever done. Because when you let it go, you feel you've just freed yourself from the bondage you kept yourself in. You will also feel the lightness. You will feel this toxicity leaving you. You will feel the weight leaving you. You will feel the darkness leaving you. You will feel the energy that comes back, the energy you were spending on hating somebody, coming back now. Energy of kindness, love, and affection. It's positive. You can't be happy hating somebody. You can't be happy resenting somebody. It doesn't work that way. That's not the way the world works. You can only be happy forgiving, being kind, being generous. So I just wanted to share that with you because I have so much experience with this, and I hope that inspires any of you who are still dealing with issues of resentment to become inspired now, to do something about it. And if I can help you through my online courses, then that would be my great honor to do so. But somehow or other, through books, through courses, any way you can do it, really you want to let it go. It will change your life in ways right now that you cannot imagine. Trust me on this. It is amazingly powerful. It is one of the most transformational experiences I've ever had in my life. What are we going to talk about today? Of course, relationships, marriage, it's so important. Recently I've been thinking that when we have to look, I want to talk about relationships, especially when we look at the world and the next generation. Because what we do as parents, as fathers and mothers, is we establish the ground for bringing up healthy children or bringing up dysfunctional children. If we bring up children who are dysfunctional because we're dysfunctional or we have a dysfunctional relationship, that will carry on in their lives to the next generation. Maybe you were raised in a dysfunctional family and you're carrying it on. We have to stop that. We need to create functionality. We need to create homes where there's stability, there's love and affection. And we will produce children who can contribute amazingly to the world, to the stability and the betterment of the world. Now, we look at the world today, we see there are a lot of problems. There's a lot of crime, there's a lot of dysfunction. There's a lot of injustice, there's a lot of hatred, bigotry, prejudice, and so forth. And, you know, we want to change that, but you can't just change it by laws. You change it by giving people, giving our children a stable material and an enriched spiritual education and life. So it's not just about me having a good relationship with my wife so I can be happy. It's much bigger than that. It's about creating an environment at home where I raise children that will be amazing, that will make the world better, that will make other people better, that will make everyone better. Not raising children that will go through their life troubled, depressed, hurt, resentful, angry, and take that out on other people. That's not the kind of world we want, but that's the way the world's becoming. So I would ask you to meditate on your life and understand that as you improve yourself and as you improve your relationships, that will improve your children. Now, maybe you don't have children, but you will have in the future. And this is important for you to understand. Because your children will see what you do. They won't listen so much to what you say. they will listen to what you do. They're very observant. And they will model that. And the examples you set for them, whether they like it or not, will become the examples, will become their lifestyle, will become what they do, the way they think. Even they don't want to be that way sometimes because parents set bad examples, but they end up like that. And they say, my God, I've tried so hard not to be this way, but this is what I grew up with, and this is how I am. It works the other way. If they grow up with good examples, even they may reject your ideas and your values, but it gets in their heart, and that's how they become as adults. So it's a very important meditation. Life is not just about what you want for yourself and what will make you happy, but it's about creating environments where people can grow, especially people in your family, creating this beautiful relationship between husband and wife that your kids grew up around, creating this beautifully stable relationship where you, mother and father, are both responsible, stable, and have the ability to work out problems. And this is what we teach our kids. And if we don't teach our kids this, what are we offering to the world? What are we offering to the next generation? Indians say, live today by thinking about how what you're doing is going to affect 6 generations from now. So what are you doing now? How does that affect 6 generations? It's a beautiful thought. How are you living in your family? How will that affect your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren? Think about it. It carries a lot of weight, and we have that responsibility to the future generations to contribute to our children, who will then contribute to their children, who will then contribute to their children. I would like to talk about my own experience. Growing up in America, and then finding a spiritual path and how that affected me and transformed me, because I think a lot of us are very similar. I grew up at a very materialistic time in society, and my generation basically revolted against it because we saw it as so shallow and meaningless. And we had the Vietnam War and World War II and the Korean War, and we're just seeing war after war. We're seeing that people are not happy, even though our economy is growing, even though we have more than ever before. And frankly, I felt personally that my parents spoiled me. All of us were spoiled, our whole generation, because our parents grew up in the Depression. So they wanted to make sure we had a good life, and they just gave us and gave us and gave us. And because they gave us so much, at a certain point we said, no more, I don't want this. This doesn't work. So we kind of rejected everything, threw the baby out with the bathwater. So there was some good to it and some bad to it, but at least we were searching for answers and for meaning, and I think that was a great contribution of my generation. We were asking good questions, like why questions, like why are we here? What happens after death? Where do we come from? Why should we do anything? What's the purpose behind it? And we're asking questions about motive. Okay, this may be right, but what's my motive in doing it? Am I trying to get something from you? Or are you trying to get something from me? How do we deal with that? So this amazing thing happened to me. I was in university in Berkeley, and I was very inquisitive and very philosophical, interested in psychology and questioning life, and then I thought maybe I'll become a professor. That would just kind of suit me, basically live on campus and get to talk philosophy, talk about life and like that. And so I went to a class, it was a philosophy class, and the first day of class, this is a true story, you may not believe it, but it's true, the professor says, you don't have to come to my class because I don't know anything. Wow. He said, just write a term paper, give yourself a grade. Okay, it's Berkeley 1969. If you know anything about Berkeley in 1969, then you'll probably believe this. But there I am looking at this professor thinking, that's going to be me in the future, saying, I don't know anything, and I don't want to be in that situation. This is a philosophy professor who concluded he doesn't know anything. I thought that's so interesting. Because I felt the same way. I was only 19 then, but I felt the same way. I don't really know that much. There's so much to know, and I don't even know who I am. I don't even know why I'm here. I don't even know where I came from. I don't even know what happens on the other side after I die. Is there another life? And I thought, what's the use of anything if you don't even know why? And so that put me on a search. And I read a book called Bhagavad-Gita, which is kind of like the essence of Indian philosophy. Completely answered all my questions, turned my life around. It was amazing. That book was amazing. It answered every question I had, answered every question I didn't know to ask that I should have had. And it completely satisfied me on an intellectual level, psychological level, and a spiritual level. It was incredible. So I always recommend this book to everyone. This is the book that you really want to read and study when you're ready. When you're ready for your spiritual journey, this is the book. This book is amazing. It's deep. It's really meant for all of us. And after I read this book, I became a monk. I decided this is what I want to do. I want to teach. I want to live simply. I want to sacrifice my life for the service of others. And I slept on the floor. I woke up at 4 in the morning. We took cold showers. We went out all day sharing this message. We meditated in the morning for like 5 hours. It was very austere, but I would say that was the best time of my life, the most happy years I ever had, living such a simple and beautiful life and sharing the message of the Gita with thousands of people and watching people light up with this message, watching their lives change, watching them find answers to questions that they couldn't answer. It's such a beautiful experience, such an endearing experience, and such a fulfilling experience. And so from that time, I've now, it's almost 50 years now, that I've been teaching the Gita and other teachings through workshops, through books, through online courses. And it's the most fulfilling thing that I could ever do. Sharing knowledge that can enlighten people is enlightening me. It's filling me up. Whatever you give to others, you get back. So if you know anything, if you have some spiritual knowledge, if you can benefit people, share it. Because as you share it, you will grow, you will enrich yourself. Whatever I am giving you that you feel is valuable, please share it with others. You can share these videos, but you can also share what you're learning. You can share with your friends. You can apply what you're learning and then show that example. That's another way to share. And as you share, you grow, you become more fulfilled. You become, as you share, you start to realize what you're sharing in deeper ways than you did before. It's a beautiful experience. This is what my life is like every day. It's just sharing what I'm learning, trying to live better what I'm learning, trying to be what I teach. And I just encourage people to do the same. You don't have to make it a profession, but do it in your own little way, and you will find deep, deep, deep satisfaction in sharing and helping other people become better. You will always become better when you help other people become better. Have you ever wondered why people who are very successful, perhaps famous, extremely wealthy, commit suicide, or become depressed, or become alcoholics? I had a friend when I was like 17, and he always had girlfriends. He was attractive, and I'd see him with girlfriends, and I'd think, oh my God, this guy is like so happy, he's so happening. I hardly have any girlfriends. I don't know how to get girlfriends. I get all the wrong girlfriends. One day he was talking to me, and he was opening his heart to me and saying how unhappy he was. Isn't that interesting? That we see other people and we think, oh, their lives are amazing. And then we talk to them and we find out it only looks amazing. Not really amazing as we thought. And sometimes it's quite tragic. Have you ever said, if I just have this, then I'll be happy. If I just get this, I'll be happy? Of course, we've all said it. Now, think about it. You said that a few years ago, and you probably look at your life now. You have all the things that you said would make you happy a few years ago. If I just got this job, this income, this relationship, this neighborhood, etc. And gradually, as you get them, you realize, well, that doesn't work. It doesn't work that way. Isn't that interesting? And right now, probably you're thinking, if I just get this or that, I'll be happy. Well, if it didn't work in the past, why would it work now? So what's going on? I think it's obvious to us when we think about what's going on. There's something we're not getting, and it's not material. What the heart wants cannot be fulfilled with something material. And that's why spiritual life and spiritual practice is so important. There's a hole in our heart, and we're trying to fill that hole with material things. And it just doesn't work. It doesn't work for anybody. Why are successful people looking for happiness in alcohol? If what they're doing is satisfying them to such a level, why do they need alcohol? Why do they need drugs? Some people are addicted to sports. Why do we need these things if we've achieved what we want in life? Because when we achieve what we want in life, we realize it's not actually what we want. There's something else we want, and we don't know what it is. But it's spiritual. That's what fulfills the heart. Whatever spiritual practice it is, whatever you call spiritual, that's another topic. But this is just a simple point that we're trying to fulfill the hole in our heart with something material, and it doesn't work with another relationship, another this, another that. And we need to be wise enough to understand that I've already tried my best, and it's not that I just had the wrong relationship, or the wrong job, or the wrong this, the wrong neighborhood. It's not about that. It might make it a little better, a better relationship here, a better job here, of course. But that's not the real solution. The real solution is to fulfill the spiritual need, which will fill that emptiness within our heart. I counsel thousands of people. Everybody is suffering from this. It's a universal problem. It's epidemic. Everyone's got a hole in their heart, and they're trying to fulfill it materially. And marketing is trying to make us unhappy. It's trying to tell us that my product is going to fulfill that hole. It's trying to remind us that we have the hole. And so it's like an insidious process that we're caught into, and we kind of become slaves of consumerism in the hopes that it's going to fulfill the hole. But it just makes us more unhappy. So I'm encouraging you to take more spiritually, a daily spiritual practice where you chant, where you meditate, where you study sacred literature, where you reflect on the literature, you journal. You go in, you take the journey within, you become introspective. That is what is going to fulfill you in ways that buying and partying, etc., will never fulfill you. The mind is such an interesting topic. What is it when you're talking to your mind? Who's talking to who? When you're hearing these thoughts, where are they coming from? What do you do about them? What if you have bad thoughts? Do you have to follow them? Do you have to allow them to control you? Can you create new thoughts? It's the topic of today's discussion, very important, and I think this is going to empower you in amazingly new ways. And I want to give you some insight about thoughts from the Indian philosophical paradigm, from the Buddhist paradigm, from Eastern religious tradition, which is similar to the kind of behavioral psychology we understand today, but it has added elements unknown to modern psychologists who haven't studied Eastern philosophy. According to Eastern philosophy, this is not our first life. And therefore, when we come into this world, we take an incarnation, we take a physical form, which is different than our last form. But the mind is not different. We bring in the same mind. So whatever mind we had in the past, that becomes the mind we have now. If you have the mind of Dalai Lama in the past, you'll have this beautiful mind. If you have the mind of a bad person in the past, you'll have a bad mind. And that explains why sometimes or often we have thoughts we don't know why we have. We don't know where they've come from. We don't know why they're haunting us. We don't want those thoughts. Those are thoughts that we wanted in the past. But now as we're evolving, we don't want them now. And we're bewildered by them, and we get controlled by them. So first thing to understand is you do not have to act on those thoughts. Those are thoughts from the past, and think, the past has come to the present to haunt me. I don't have to give credence to those thoughts. I can create my own thoughts. I don't have to give energy to those thoughts. I don't have to give attention to those thoughts, because if I give attention and energy to those thoughts, they become bigger and more powerful. Just because those thoughts are in your head doesn't mean you have to act on them. You have the choice not to act upon them. You have the choice not to give them energy. And if you don't give them energy, they're going to fizzle out. They're going to die. What you want to do is create thoughts that empower you. Create thoughts which are aligned with your highest self and your highest goals and your spiritual nature. And you can do that. You can actually do that. Isn't that amazing? You can actually choose the thoughts you want to think and delete or discard the thoughts you don't want. And if you practice that, and I suggest you practice that starting when? Right now. And for the rest of your life, you'll see a major change in your life because your mind is the steering wheel of your life. And if you're not in control of your mind, if you think your thoughts as they come have to control you, then you're at the mercy of your mind, whatever it thinks. And until you're very elevated and very pure, that's a dangerous position to be in. An elevated soul, no problem, because all their thoughts are the right thoughts. But until we're on that level, all our thoughts, as you know, are not the right thoughts. And you know thoughts can get you down. Thoughts of envy, resentment, anger, hatred. We don't need them. They're not good for us. They don't help us. We need thoughts of kindness, compassion, generosity, and so forth. And we can place those thoughts in our mind and be empowered by those thoughts, and we can disregard, not give attention to disempowering thoughts. Try that right now, today, tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, and you will see what a dramatic improvement that will have on your life. You can do this. Don't doubt it. You can decide what to think, and you can decide not what to think. Always remember that. You can decide where to put your attention, and you can decide where not to put your attention. It's very important and it's very interesting. It's going to help you a lot. We have the crickets in the background singing to you just to calm you down. And I love to teach outside. I'm on my property here. And I think it just creates that perfect environment for what I'm saying, because nature is so soothing and what we're talking about is so real and so natural. There is something that you've all heard about. It's called ego. But in Sanskrit sacred literature, ego is not used exactly the same way in which we use it in the West. Rather, ego is not considered bad because ego is just considered identity. What's considered bad is a false identity. So generally when we talk about someone having a big ego, we're really talking about a false identity. He thinks he's bigger than he actually is. He thinks, or she thinks, he or she is more important than they actually are. They're greater than they are. And what the Sanskrit sacred texts call that is false ego, a false identity, a false conception of who they are. And so how does this work? When I find a good quality in myself, I try to grab it and say, well, that's mine. I created it. I don't think that quality was given to me to use in service to others. I think I created that, it's mine. That's called false ego. False ego wants to grab everything and call it one's own. For example, the biggest misconception of false ego is that I think I'm the physical body. This body was given to me. I don't own it, and I'm going to lose it at some point. To think this is me, when really I'm just renting this body, it was really just given to me. It's made of the elements of earth. It goes back into the elements of earth. It's called false ego. I identify with something that isn't mine. Or I think this property here is mine. It belongs to me. It was here before I came. It's going to be here after I came. It was not created by me. It's not really mine. Of course, the bank owns it. But aside from that, speaking philosophically, this is Mother Earth. And this was not created by me. This was created by Him. And I'm just using it. I don't identify it as mine. But in material consciousness, we identify it as mine. This is mine. Or we can say, what I own is mine. So when we have that misconception, then when we get a thought, we think, that thought is mine. That's who I am. That's my identity. Whatever that thought is thinking is me. But it's not true. That's also a manifestation of the false ego. That just as we're identifying with the body, this is me, I'm an American man, I live in such and such a place, I'm a certain age, I have certain abilities, certain occupation. In the same way, I think when a thought comes, I think that's me, that's the thought. So let's say, for example, you get this idea that you want something. The false ego will tell you that what you want is you. And the spiritual consciousness will say it's just a thought, and you are different from that thought. You are a soul, within the body who's different from that thought, who can analyze that thought and say, is this what I want? Is this what I need? Is this thought or this need within my own integrity? Is it aligned with what I want to achieve? And we might say, no, that thought I shouldn't identify with. I shouldn't see that as me because it's not. It's antagonistic to what I want. As we spoke in the last session about thoughts, some thoughts come which are no longer really who we are. They're not part of our identity. So when a thought comes, usually what most of us think is that thought is me. Therefore, I want this. That's the thought. The thought is saying, you want this. This will make you happy. And we think, yes, that's me speaking. It's not you speaking. It's the mind speaking. And you're not the mind. Now, you may like that thought or you may not like that thought. But when you identify with that thought, you will think that is you speaking. And that's why it's so hard to turn that thought down when the mind says, you want this, this will make you happy. And you know it won't make you happy, and you know you don't want it, but it's hard to separate from that thought because you think that thought is you. So the thought steals your identity. The mind steals your identity and says, I am you. When actually you are consciousness. You are separate from the mind. You are the soul within the body. You are the soul that observes the thoughts. But your mind steals that identity and says, I am you. Therefore, when I say you want this, or you like this, or you don't like this, then we identify with that. And that's where we get into trouble. So remember, a thought is not you because you're not the mind. You are beyond the mind. You're the consciousness. You're aware of your thoughts. You observe your thoughts. And because you are aware and observe your thoughts, it means you are different from your thoughts. Obviously, because you can observe them. So who's the you that's observing them? You are the observer of your thoughts. And once you identify those thoughts as you lose that ability to observe your thoughts. But if you keep that ability to observe your thoughts, then you can analyze, is this a thought that is in alignment with my higher self? Is this a thought that's within the integrity of my purpose in life? And it may not be. There may be many thoughts that aren't. And we can say, that thought is not what I want, that thought is not me. I observe that thought, I don't like the thought, I don't want the thought, and I let it go. So that's a spiritual analysis of how the mind works and how we should look at the mind. And if we see it that way, then we can detach from thoughts we don't want, and we will never identify thoughts as who we are. Today I want to talk about letting go of what we don't need, what we don't want, what we're attached to that's harming us. All of us are in this situation. A beautiful thought, when you want to let something go, is just remind yourself, I don't need this. It's something that's disturbing you. It's something that's harming you. I don't need it, and I don't have to hold on to it. And this is a powerful thought. As many of you know, I teach a course in forgiveness. Now, one of the main principles of forgiveness is that we are the ones holding on to the resentment. And oftentimes, I know, because I've been through it, it doesn't feel like I'm holding on to it. It feels like it is holding on to me. But in actuality, our emotions don't cling to us. We cling to our emotions. Just as we were talking the other day about thoughts. We cling to thoughts which we can let go. We also cling to emotions which we can let go. So it's very powerful when we look at these toxic emotions, such as resentment, or envy, or hatred, or anger, jealousy, and so forth. And we ask ourselves, do I need them? Is it helping me? Is it helping anybody? Is this what I want to contribute to the world? Is this the purpose of my life, to contribute more resentment and more envy to the world, to the mass consciousness? Obviously, no. And then we have to remember, I don't have to. I have a choice. I can let it go. Now, sometimes I give the example. Think of an emotion in your hand. Okay, imagine you're holding an emotion in your hand, right? You can let it go. You can just drop it. One time, my spiritual master told a very funny story. He said a man was embracing a tree, and he was yelling, let me go, let me go, let me go. This is exactly what we are doing with our emotions that we say, we just can't let go. I don't know how to let go. It's too difficult to let go. The person who hurt me doesn't deserve to be forgiven. What we're actually doing is we're holding on to that emotion. And we can let it go. You can let it go. You could let it go right now. I just want you to know that. That you, as we've been talking about, are not the body. You're not the mind. You're not the emotion. You're above it all. You're not even the intelligence. You're the soul within the body. You have the power to let it go. You can do that, and you can do it right now. But you're going to need a reason to do it. And the reason I'm giving you today is that you don't need it. It doesn't serve you. Why hold on to something that not only does not serve you, but is harming you? Something you absolutely don't need. Something that absolutely cannot help you, and is absolutely harming you. And as you meditate on it more and more, it's going to be easier to let it go because you realize you don't need it. You're not punishing anyone other than yourself by holding on to it. You don't need to get back at anyone. Justice will be met when it's met by the laws of karma. You don't have to play God. You don't have to worry about it. You just have to be peaceful, calm, elevate your consciousness to a more spiritual level. That's all. That's what your life is meant for. It's not meant to get back at people. It's not meant to hold on to toxic emotions and toxic thoughts. That's not what it's for. You don't have to. There's no need. And the sooner you let it go, the better off you will be. So I'm asking you today, think of some toxic emotion you're holding on to. Think of it like something you're holding on to. And just ask yourself, am I willing to let it go? Could I let it go? Would I let it go? Could I do it right now? Of course the answer is yes, 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 but you won't do it until you answer yes. So keep asking yourself until you realize, I can answer yes, and I can just say, okay, I'm going to let it go. You can do that. And I'm asking you to do it today, or tomorrow, or the next day. But do it soon, because you can do it. So we're going to get a little esoteric here. I hope that's okay. So, long, long ago, according to sacred wisdom, we came into this world because we wanted to come to experience life independent of our Creator. We wanted to do our own thing. And we've been transmigrating for thousands, millions of lifetimes in search of finding happiness and satisfaction, independent of that connection. The word yoga means connection. Independent of that connection. Many of us come to a point where we realize how much we need that connection and how much we suffer without it. And that material life, in and of itself, is a futile attempt at being happy and satisfied, and that there's something missing. And we begin to search for spiritual life, a spiritual process, a spiritual philosophy, to make sense of all of this. So chanting is very interesting because it's a prayer for reconnection in realization that I disconnected. Reconnection, yoga, a-yoga or near yoga, disconnection. So we all disconnected and we're praying for that connection. And the interesting thing about the prayer is we're actually praying to go against our own conditioned nature, which is to turn our back to the Supreme and turn our face to this world. And because that tendency is so strong, we're praying to be able to overcome it. Because we know in our head that we need to overcome it, but the heart doesn't want to overcome it. The heart wants it. That's our conditioning. The head knows, no, this is wrong, this is bad. So it's a prayer. Please allow me to connect my head with what's in my head, with what I know is true, with my heart, so that I feel what I know is in my head. Please allow me to experience that desire to be a servant always. Please allow me to experience my spiritual nature, my unconditioned nature always. So it's a prayer to we went this way, it's a prayer to reconnect. Please empower me, please help me come back and reconnect, even though my tendency is to disconnect. We're going to talk about living what we believe, alignment. This is what I value, but do I actually do it in my life? And I'm going to give you an exercise that we do in our forgiveness workshop, and you could try it, and it's quite amazing. So what I want you to do is take a piece of paper, or you can do this in your mind, make a list, make a line down the middle. On the left side, write what you believe, write what you value, what are your priorities, what's important for you, what's dear to you, what really do you believe in. saving the earth, being vegetarian, being clean, meditating, doing yoga, rising early, being a nice person, being compassionate, whatever it is, you write that down. Now, imagine we had a video of your life for the past 6 months. And we had a group of people watching the videos with the goal of determining what you believe. Of course, you can't tell them what you believe. They can only see how you deal with other people, how you live personally, what you do, what you don't do, what makes you happy, what doesn't make you happy, what upsets you, what you tolerate, what you don't tolerate. What do you think they would say? You write that in the right list. Now, if we're totally aligned or perfectly aligned, the left list and the right list will be the same. That is not common. Most people have some things out of alignment on the right side. Some people have everything out of alignment on the right side. And you might wonder, why is that? The reason is because when we act, we know what our motives are. So if I'm not doing something that I believe I should do, it still feels like I'm doing it. Because in my heart, deep down inside, this is what I want to do. Let's say I'm not recycling, but I believe in recycling, but for circumstantially, I can't. I don't have the facility, I don't have the time, whatever the reason. But in my mind, I believe in recycling. And so I see what my motive is, but obviously other people, they just see what I'm doing. And so it's interesting, there's a kind of what psychologists call cognitive dissonance between what we think we are and value and believe and what we do. So, if you believe something, you think you believe something, but you're not living it, it's time to become aware. And the purpose of this exercise is to bring awareness. I think I'm a nice guy, but I don't always treat people nicely. I think I'm compassionate, but sometimes I'm selfish. But I don't notice it because I think I'm compassionate. And if I think I'm compassionate, it's hard to notice when I'm not compassionate, when I'm selfish. So this exercise hopefully will bring more awareness in your day-to-day life if you are actually aligned with what you believe. If you're on a spiritual path, you want to become what your sacred books teach. You want to be a personification of that. Now, interesting point we'll end with. If you believe something and you don't live it, actually what it means is you don't believe it. You want to believe it because, technically speaking, or exactly speaking, what we believe in actuality is what we live. That's how I am defining belief. You're living it. So if you believe it but you don't live it, it just means you want to believe it, or it means you think you believe it but you actually don't. So meditate on this. This, for some people, is a life-changing exercise because there's so many things that were out of alignment in their lives before they did this exercise that they didn't realize. And after doing the exercise, they started to become more conscious, more aware of where they're out of alignment, and they could bring it back. And so the goal is, this is what you believe, this is how you live, it's the same thing. I like talking about myself to you, not because necessarily I've got a big ego and I like talking about myself, but I think we can relate. I think we're of the same mind frame, and I think a lot of my experiences you will relate well to, like the experience of looking, searching, asking questions, why, what is life's purpose, why am I not happy, why are the things that I thought would make me happy don't make me happy. So I like to share those stories because I think it helps us. And one story I'd like to share with you is the story of how I began my spiritual life and the challenges I had and how I dealt with those challenges. And when I began my spiritual life, I thought, it's going to be easy. I'll be self-realized within a few months. And one of the things you find when you begin something is the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. And the better you get at it, the more you realize the further you have to go. And the better you get at it, oftentimes you realize how difficult it is. And the longer you do it, you realize how conditioned you are, how habituated you are to live more of a materialistic life and a material way of thinking. And sometimes you don't notice that until you really try to elevate yourself to another level. I know I thought I was doing really well, I was very spiritual, and I was to a certain degree, but not to the degree that I thought, because when I tried to raise my level of purity, I started becoming aware, much more aware of what I was lacking. And that poses a problem for many of us as we become more aware of what we're lacking, where our faults lie. It can be discouraging, it can be difficult to continue. And so, how did I continue going even when things were difficult? I always thought and felt that the effort for self-realization, the effort for spiritual life, is the most worthwhile effort of any effort. And although it's difficult, I always felt that in the end of my life, when I look back at the struggles I went through and what I tolerated and the determination I put into my spiritual practice, that I would say, yes, I'm glad I did that. And that if I gave it up, I would lament at the end of my life and say, well, I would have been so much more enriched now if I would have continued. So I would always look at the options. Well, if I don't take this path, well, what are the options? The options never look good. The options were basically to do the things that I was doing that were frustrating me, that brought me originally to investigate spiritual life and practice spiritual life, because I wanted more. I wanted to go deeper. I wanted a more profound life. I wanted a deeper level of happiness and satisfaction. So when the spiritual path started having some bumps in the road, so to speak, I would always think, well, what's the alternative? My alternative would be to go back doing what I was doing before that wasn't working for me. So it's a good thought, and it's a helpful thought, because sometimes it does get difficult. Some of you are learning how to meditate, and sometimes it's hard. It's hard to control the mind. Sometimes we don't want to do it. But if you do it every day, if you have a spiritual practice and you follow it every day, it builds year after year after year. And you'll be glad that you did it. It pays off tremendously. So that's just a little advice, a little encouragement from my own experience in spiritual practice, that when it's difficult, I always think, well, what's the option? What am I going to do that's actually going to really help or be better than this? And often the answer is, or always, I would say always the answer is, the same thing I was doing that originally brought me to spiritual life that wasn't working for me. So think about it. I think it will help you. I wanted to share with you a spiritual perspective on stress. Of course, stress is part of life, and a lot of people teach us how to get rid of stress, but they don't hit the spiritual platform, or really, what is the cause of stress? You may say, well, the cause of stress is I have a test tomorrow, or I'm applying for a job, and if I don't get the job, then I'm going to have financial trouble, and I'm going through a divorce, or I've just been enlisted to do something that's extremely difficult or I don't want to do. Yeah, these are all natural causes of distress. But at the same time, they don't have to be stressful, because it depends how you relate to them. So that's one aspect, that's a very important aspect of dealing with stress. That stress is existing not in the situation, but it's existing within us. It's existing within our response to a situation. So don't think that just because the situation is stressful, you have to be stressed. It makes sense that I would be stressed in a stressful situation, but it's also important to know that that's not true. You don't have to be stressed, because stress is a response to a situation. You can say this situation is stressful, but that's a subjective statement. It's not stressful. You're stressed by the situation. The situation itself doesn't have stress in it. The stress is being created within yourself in response to the situation. So when you say it's a stressful situation, always remember it's a subjective statement. Now I want to go to, as I said, I want to go to the spiritual level. Really, what is the cause of stress? Well, my spiritual master explained something that is so interesting, philosophically interesting. He said that we as a soul are eternal, we as a soul are blissful, And we as a soul, by nature, have all knowledge, or by nature, we're enlightened. But we live in a world in which we have a body which is not eternal. We are not fully enlightened, and we're not always happy. Happiness, some days not happy. Some people are never happy. Some people are happier more than others. But nobody's happy all the time. And bliss is even beyond happiness. So no one is blissful all the time. Most people are not blissful anytime. They're just happy because something good happened. But bliss is it's a higher stage of happiness, a spiritual ecstasy that comes from within. So that's our nature. So my spiritual master said, the reason that there is stress, the reason there is anxiety is because we're an eternal, blissful, knowledgeable, spiritual being living in a world which is temporary, where we don't have full knowledge, and we're not always happy. So we're in an environment which is like a fish out of water. This is not our environment. So as a spirit soul living in a foreign environment, subconsciously there's all this stress on us. We don't even understand it, but it's a constant form of stress. When you wake up in the morning, you don't think, oh, I could die today. Most people don't think that. But subconsciously, we're always aware. Like when you drive, you protect yourself from getting in an accident. When you walk across the street, you make sure there's no cars coming. We're always conscious of the fact that we could die and we don't want to. And the thought of death it's horrible. Why? Because we're eternal. It just doesn't work for us. An eternal being dying, a blissful being being unhappy, a fully knowledgeable being not knowing. So that's actually the spiritual cause of stress. The fundamental, the essential cause of stress is coming from being a spiritual being in a material environment. So when you look at it this way, actually we have a quarrel, we have a fundamental problem with this world. And our life in being happy is really an exercise in denial of this reality. Many people just deny this. We put death out of our mind. We put the fact that we can't be happy all the time just as, well, that's the way life is, that we don't know that's the way life is. But it's not the way we are as spiritual beings. So on this most subtle level, we have a fundamental quarrel with the way this world is. And then you might say, well, why is the world this way if we are not this way? It's to awaken us to realize that we're different from this world, that we don't fit in this world. It doesn't feel right. Dying doesn't feel right. Being unhappy doesn't feel right. Why should I be unhappy? Doesn't God love me? Why should I die? Doesn't God love me? Why should I be in ignorance? Why should I make mistakes? Doesn't God love me? Well, He does. He created you full of knowledge, eternal, and blissful. But we don't realize that. And so we're going around subtly with this problem that this world just doesn't really work for us as a spiritual being. And on that subtle level, that's where the real stress is coming from. And everybody's stressed. But we're not conscious of the stress. But that's the real core, the real cause of the stress. And the other stress is, it's temporary. You know that. It's a stressful situation. You get through it. You're okay. You come home. You relax. You take a bath. You do something. You're okay. So that kind of stress, it comes and goes. This other kind of stress is permanent. It's always there. And it's very, very important for us to recognize that and recognize our awkwardness in this world and awaken to that reality so that we can become more deeply connected on the spiritual level, where we will find the most stress-free and happy life possible. There is a book called The Road Less Traveled. So what's the road less traveled? Well, it's the journey within, because the journey without is common. Everyone's making that journey towards achievement, fulfillment of various desires, and coming to a certain level of success and wealth and whatever it is you want in the external world. But there's also this neglected world, which is the internal world. And of course, you could define the internal world differently, but I'm going to define it as your divine connection. And so when we take the journey within, we're taking the journey within on the spiritual or transcendental level to connect spiritually. And so that's what meditation essentially is all about. It's about a divine connection which we make through meditation, through prayer, through giving our heart. So in all the meditations we're doing, we're really taking a journey within, where we are turning off the external world. We're turning off that external stimulus. We're unplugging our life, unplugging from our life, and then we're meditating on our divine connection. We're connecting with ourselves beyond the physical and mental body as a soul, as consciousness, and connecting with the Supreme Consciousness through our heart, through love, through devotion. So the journey within is really the journey. It's the most important journey. It's the journey that lasts after this lifetime, because as you connect, make that divine connection, it grows. And if it's not perfected in this life, you work on it in the next life. But whatever you have created here, whatever you have achieved here, you're going to lose it. You can't take it with you. It's gone. So the internal journey, it's the real one. It's the real important journey. And I suggest, or I ask you humbly, take that journey seriously, because that's really why you've come to this world. It's really your purpose here, is to make that journey. The external journey, naturally, you will make. We have to make it. It's part of maintaining our existence. But it's not as important as the internal journey. And our materialistic society puts so much emphasis on the external journey. So we have to be smart. We have to be clear about the importance of the internal journey, and then focus our attention on that. And what we find is that when we make the spiritual journey correct, the material journey, it falls into place naturally. So any meditation you do, really, you're really just disconnecting from your external world so that you can focus a little bit of time every day on that most important divine connection. There's a Sanskrit word called Sangha. Sangha means association. But specifically, when we talk about Sangha, we talk about associating with people who are like-minded, and specifically like-minded spiritually. So what can you do with like-minded spiritual people? You can talk about spiritual topics. You can talk about your own self-realization. You can introspect, and they can introspect, and you can discuss what you're finding inside. You can discuss what you've been reading. You can meditate together. You can do kirtan, group chanting together. There's so many things you can do together. Because you're like-minded, your energy synergizes. So what happens is, although you're thinking one way and they're thinking one way, and you're trying to endeavor to evolve and they're trying to endeavor to evolve, when you're together, it magnifies many, many, many fold. And so things that you couldn't do on your own and they couldn't do on their own, together you can do them. Isn't that wonderful? So in sacred literature, the literature that I study and teach, the Vedas, it is said that Sangha, or being with spiritually minded people, is one of the essential practices to evolve spiritually. Essential practice. It must be done. In other words, this is not something we can do on our own. We're just not that strong. And we're not strong enough to be around people who aren't on a spiritual path, because they will tend to pull us down, even if we're trying to resist it. And sometimes it's subtle. You don't even notice it, but it's affecting us. So, Sangha, find people you can relate to. Find people who are on your spiritual path. That's why in the Mantra Project, we created this app so you could have the Sangha of many people who are chanting. You can discuss with them, become their friends, and so forth. This is so important. And you will see by doing it, their good will reflect. And you'll pick up their good, and you'll reflect it back to them, and they'll pick up your good, and they'll reflect it back to you, and you'll just keep this dynamic process of increasing your spiritual consciousness and your spiritual strength. So it's actually a very simple principle, and you will understand it deeply, profoundly, when you're in the Sangha of other people, because you will experience tremendous upliftment of your spiritual consciousness. But I think you understand this, but I just wanted to make the point that the spiritual literature says this is fundamental, essential. It's something we have to do to evolve spiritually, that we're not meant to live in caves or on top of mountains alone. Because the mind is crazy, and the mind will just think of so many things other than our spiritual involvement. But when we're around people who are also thinking about spiritual life, it solidifies our spiritual thinking. So get in the Sangha, associate with other people on the spiritual path. We have a huge Sangha of followers of the Mantra Project. Join the Sangha, be part of it, and you will experience great, what I could say almost like effortless spiritual progress within the Sangha. In this video I want to talk about environment. I spent a lot of time in India, and I spent a lot of time in some very holy places, and I've taken a lot of people to these places, and it's amazing when you're there, your consciousness skyrockets to the spiritual world. You like become a different person. It's really special. You just feel enlivened, you feel very clear in your consciousness, you feel very connected to your source, connected to other people. You feel very inclined to do spiritual practice. You feel very inclined to introspection. And then you go back to your home, and most of us live in big cities, and gradually that consciousness erodes and you're wondering, where did it go? Or why is it like that? Or what happened? Well, what happened is the environment changed. And because we're so conditioned by our environment, sometimes we become different people in different environments. And I'm sure you've experienced that also. Maybe not as drastic as going to some great spiritual pilgrimage, but going in the country, for example, being by a waterfall, running water. You feel different than you do sitting in front of a computer in an office under a fluorescent light, obviously, or sitting in a car stuck in rush hour traffic. So, what's the point? Well, the point is, because we're affected by our environment, which also includes people in our environment, we need to understand that whatever it is we're trying to achieve in our life, whatever goals we have to create environments that support that goal. For example, if you're an alcoholic trying to give up alcohol, I'm not saying you are, but if one is, all the alcohol has to leave. All the friends who drink alcohol, can't be around them if they're drinking. You can't put one drop of alcohol on your tongue because there's a habit there, and then you'll be inspired by that habit, inspired, so to speak, conditioned. So what is it that you want? Well, what kind of people have what you want? What do you want to be? What kind of people are like that? What environments will support that? What environments will pull you away from that or degrade that? You want to start thinking that way. Because we're all weak and we're so much moved by our environment that it's intelligent for us to think, okay, if I want to go this way, I should be with people going that way. I should be with environments going that way. If I don't want to go this way, I shouldn't be with people going this way. I shouldn't be in environments that are going this way. It's actually a very simple principle. It's so simple, we miss it. So now think about your life, think about what you want to do, and think about environments that will help you do that. Think about people who do something similar, or if you don't know people who do something similar, think about finding people who do something similar. In this way, you can create the proper environment to support you. It's really simple, and it's really powerful. And it works for you or against you. I wanted to talk about control. And as we all know, it's very frustrating when we can't control something that we really want or we really need to control. You're late for an appointment, you're caught in traffic, there's an accident, and you wish all the traffic could just disappear. Or you get bad news from the doctor and you wish the news were different. Or something has happened in the past. You wish you could change it, but you can't. Or a friend is behaving in a certain way and you wish they would behave differently, and you can't change it. So it's very frustrating because in our entire life, there's so many things we can't change that we wish we could change. And just look at the world, the violence, the crime, war, etc. And we wish we could change it, but we can do little or nothing in most of these situations. So how do we deal with that? And how do we deal with things within ourselves that are a certain way? Maybe I can't sing, and I've tried to sing, but I can't. I don't have a good voice. It's just the way it is, and I can't change that. Now, if excessively we want to change things. It's a psychological disease. But what I'm talking about is just normal life. The world is conspiring to make things happen in a certain way. And there's absolutely nothing we can do about it. But the problem is we can't accept that. We want to do something about it, but there's absolutely nothing we can do. And then we ruminate over it. Or maybe we even try to change it. And perhaps inside of us we know it's useless. We can't change it, even though we're trying, because we so desperately want it to be different. This is actually a spiritual principle, something that we're all learning in life slowly. And that is, we're not supreme controllers. We're not in control of everything. In fact, we're not in control of much. And life is a constant challenge for us to accept what we can't control. And that's what it means to be spiritually evolved, to be detached enough or accepting enough that when things go a particular way, even though we don't want them to go that way, we can just accept it. And if you can do that, you will evolve yourself spiritually, and on the physical or material level, you'll be much more peaceful, more calm, because no longer will you be trying to change things you can't, but when you're in situations and you realize this is how it is, there's nothing I can do, you just accept it, and you become very peaceful through this kind of detachment. So we understand intellectually what we can and cannot change. But in our heart, still, we don't always accept that. And so this is a very, very valuable and important principle for evolving spiritually. And our whole life is really just one big lesson to learn what we can control and to accept what we can't control.
Recently, one of my students was asking me how to deal with people who are emotionally immature, people who are unreasonable. Sometimes they act like children. They're blaming, they're criticizing. And I told her, well, you have to decide who you want to be friends with, and you have to understand where people are coming from. Some people have a very traumatic past, and therefore they act that way. And so sometimes you need to support them and try to help them work through that if you can help them. But if their presence or friendship has become toxic for you, it's degrading you, bringing you down, it may be best to stay at a distance. But then she asked, well, what do I do if I find those same qualities within myself? And as with any problem or any difficulty we undergo, the first thing is to recognize the problem, that I actually have a problem. And then the second thing is to become aware when I'm acting out. Because a lot of times we act out and we don't even know that we're doing that. We're acting very childish, or we're not controlling our emotions. And although it's obvious to others, it's not obvious to ourselves. So that's the next step. And then the third thing, which I think is the most important, I told her, we have to have an ideal of who we want to be, the kind of person we want to be, and perhaps have also another person in our mind as someone who we can idolize, that I want to be like that person. It doesn't have to be a person who's even alive, or it doesn't even have to be a person you met. But these are qualities that I want to live, and this person has those qualities. And it's really important to be conscious of those qualities, so that as I live my life, I'm very aware of how I want to live. And when I'm out of alignment, I'm very aware that I'm veering off and I don't want to act this way. So let's say, for example, a situation is disturbing and you're starting to become upset, but your ideal is to be peaceful, to be a generous person, to be a kind and empathetic person. And so you're just as you're becoming disturbed, you remember that. And you realize, I'm acting out of alignment with who I want to be. So this is very, very helpful to always be conscious of that person you want to be, because then when you fall out of that, you become very aware of it. Otherwise, most of the time, we just kind of act out the way we act out. And it may be not the way we really want to act out, but we're not consciously thinking of how we want to act out. So try putting this into practice and see how it works. They used to call me crazy when I was young, and I would say, thank you. And what did I mean by that? I meant, well, I don't want to be like you. So if you think I'm crazy, that means I'm not like you, because I think you're actually crazy. I think You're so crazy, you don't even think that you're crazy. And you're so crazy, you don't even really think much. You just kind of live and work and live and work and get up and eat and go to work and come home, watch TV, and you really don't think. And because I started thinking a little bit, just a little bit, thinking about what am I doing? Why am I doing this? I started to realize that I don't want to live like everybody else. There are better ways to live, and there's so much knowledge in the world that can help us elevate ourselves, become better people, see through the illusion of materialism, consumerism, and all that, which most people don't think about much or at all. And those are the ones who thought I was crazy. So I took it as a compliment because I didn't want to be like you. And the fact that you're telling me I'm crazy, that's good. And when you begin spiritual life a little more seriously, you may have some of your friends telling you, you know, this is weird, this is wrong, this is strange. But actually, it's natural for the soul. Maybe strange for the body, strange in our society. But for the soul, it's natural, it's normal, it's the way we're supposed to be. So if people call you crazy, you can say, thank you, I really appreciate that. I'm glad you called me crazy. I was afraid you were going to call me normal. And being normal means I'd be like you, and to be like you was kind of a nightmare for me. So thank you for calling me crazy. In another video, I was talking about a situation in which people started faulting me and turning against me and blaming me, and all happened with a few people in a month. It was happening at the same time. So I wanted to talk about karma because karma explains why these things happen. Oftentimes you go through a situation and things just happen. You either good or bad. It doesn't seem like you have any control over it. And we have to understand karmic consequences because sometimes we're going through a difficult situation and no matter what we do, it doesn't get better. Or we're trying to achieve some success and no matter how hard we try, it's not happening. It doesn't mean we shouldn't try. But it means we also have to understand their karmic consequences. Not everyone will succeed on the same level just because they make the same effort. Like, for example, sometimes you find they have these workshops, seminars, how to make $1 million. Of course, the joke is the one who makes $1 million is the one who puts on the seminar. But aside from that, some people do become wealthy who go to the seminars, and a lot of people don't. But they all attended the same seminar. They learned the same thing. But their ability to apply it, their desire to apply it, and their degree of success differs because they all have their karma. So it's not just that you learn something and do it, and you're going to get the same result as someone else who learned it and did it. Sometimes you will, but often it's a karmic thing. So it's not your destiny, or it is your destiny to achieve a certain level of success. And even though you endeavor hard, you may not achieve as much as a person who doesn't endeavor as much as you. So, as I said, I'm not saying we don't endeavor and we don't try, but we should always keep this in mind. There are karmic consequences that come from past lives. And certain destinies come to us and certain things are not destined, or certain levels of success, wealth, friendship, love, and so on may not be destined for us at this time or even at any time in our life. And so to be aware of that enables us to be able to be more equipoised when we're going through difficulties. And also to understand when we go through good times, it may be a phase and it may not last forever. And so we can be equipoised also, so it doesn't go to our head and we think, oh, everything's great and fantastic and it's going to be this way forever. It may or may not be. Usually it won't be because life is up and down. So when you remember these things and you understand some good karma is coming to me now, some bad karma is coming to me, so I actually have to tolerate both the good and the bad so I can be steady in either situation. And understanding karma consequences, it's very relieving when something difficult happens because then we understand, oh, something is coming to me because of something I've done in the past. We're going to do a meditation in which we help you or empower you to gain more control over your mind. And so what is the mind? The mind is a vehicle which you control as the soul. And when thoughts come to your mind, if those thoughts are not usable or desirable, you can actually let them go. You don't have to focus on those thoughts. The problem is the focus. The problem is giving attention to thoughts. The problem is not necessarily that the wrong thoughts are there. The problem is giving attention to the wrong thoughts. Because where your attention goes, that's the problem. And so if you have the wrong thoughts, number one, you can try to let them go. You can try to ignore them. This is something my spiritual master has taught me and his disciples. You can ignore them, and one way you ignore them is don't pay any attention to them. And by not giving them energy, they tend to fade out, phase out, or as we say in America, poop out. You can also bring in thoughts that are not coming naturally, that you want to place in your mind. Because you, as the soul, as we said previously, you are above the mind. And so because you're above the mind, you have control of the thoughts you put in the mind. And I know a lot of us don't always feel like we have control of our minds, but you do. You can put a thought in your mind. You can put a thought in your mind right now. Any thought you want, you can put in your mind. Any thought you want, you can take out of your mind. You have the power to do that. So the difficulty comes is when the ego takes over, because the mind works with the ego. And the mind convinces the ego that there's no difference. So the mind says, I am you. So that means the mind steals the ego. It steals identity. And so when the mind steals identity, it says, I am you. Therefore, whatever the mind thinks, we identify with and say, that's me. My mind is saying, do this. Instead of saying, that's not me, it's just the mind. Do I want to do that? The mind steals the identity, so we can't distinguish ourselves from the mind. And so when the mind says, do this, we think, that's me telling me to do this. This is in my self-interest. It may not be in my self-interest at all, but we're not able to pull away and distinguish the difference between a thought and myself and a thought that I want or a thought that I don't want. So the mind steals the identity. It merges with the ego, and then once it has our identity, it totally controls us. And this is why we're controlled by the mind. That's a very important point. I don't know if anyone's ever told you this before. This is why we're controlled by the mind, because we think we are the mind. So as a soul, we step back. We're not the mind. We're not even the intelligence. And the intelligence is above the mind. So you're not the mind. You're not the body. You're not the senses. You're not the intelligence. You are the soul, distinct from all of these. And therefore, when thoughts come, you don't have to identify with those thoughts, because all they are is thoughts. And thoughts can come and go, and you can do whatever you want with those thoughts, because those thoughts aren't you. So the problem is when you think those thoughts are you. So realize you are potentially at least in control of your thoughts. You can do whatever you want with your thoughts. You're not bound by your thoughts. But if you forget that you're soul and you allow your mind to become you or steal ego identity, then whatever the mind says, you will think that's you, and there'll be no distinction, and then you'll have to act upon those thoughts. Why did you do this? Because my mind said to do it. Well, you didn't have to do it, but how could I not do it? I'm controlled by my mind. I'm controlled by my thoughts. You don't have to be. As long as you realize you're not the mind, you don't have to be controlled by it.
Now, there's a lot of us who are suffering from low self-esteem, and it's no wonder that we feel less than others, because there's so much competition to be beautiful, to be successful. There's stereotypes of the kind of beauty and success we should achieve. And not all of us are meant to achieve that. We're all created differently. We all have different bodies. We all have different abilities. And so it's becoming more and more difficult just to be self-accepting. But I want to give you or throw out a beautiful thought, because beyond the body, there is the soul. The soul is illuminating the body, and the soul is beautiful. So all of us, at our essence, are beautiful. And the body has really nothing to do with ourselves. It's only a covering, and it's a temporary covering. So when I see you, or you see me, we tend to judge one another on the basis of our body, what we look like, how old we are, where we're from, the color of our skin, our level of intelligence, our various abilities, and then the car we drive, the clothes we wear, the neighborhood we live in, the job we have, and so forth. But all of that has nothing to do with who we are. And so when we understand that's not who we are, we understand we're the soul, we're the consciousness. And the consciousness is full of light, it's full of love, it's eternal, it's blissful, it has all good qualities inherent within it. That gives us a lot of satisfaction and joy in understanding that our Creator made us perfect. Although I may not be exhibiting that perfection yet, but that imperfection is not who I am. And so if we don't identify with that imperfection, but we realize that as a living being, we're amazing. In fact, there's a book called Bhagavad-Gita, and it says the soul is amazing. And it said the soul is so amazing that some people, when they try to describe the soul, they can't describe the soul because it's too amazing to describe. And the depth of the soul, the beauty of the soul, the qualities, the numerous qualities the soul has, is all amazing. And that's who we are. So once we stop identifying ourselves as that person we're looking at in the mirror, or that resume, or that job, or that car, or the clothes, or the neighborhood, or with our weight, or level, or IQ, or whatever, and identify ourselves as soul, then we can transcend all these false designations, which could cause us to feel really bad about ourselves, knowing that's not who I am. And I want to throw this one thought out to you. It's kind of like a Buddhist aphorism. But just stay with me and try to understand this. It's a beautiful thought. Soul is consciousness. Without consciousness, we cannot perceive anything. So we are the consciousness. We are the one who's perceiving. So when you look in the mirror, you see yourself, or what you think to be yourself. That's your physical self, which is not your real self. The physical self won't be here in the future. So you see yourself, right? But who is actually the self? The self is the one who's seeing, the one who's observing, the one who has the power to observe that image in the mirror is who we are. So we don't see that self. And that is the self that is seeing, and we see an image in the mirror that we think is ourself, when actually the observer, the one who's observing, is actually who we are. So we don't see who we are. We see who we are not, and who we are remains invisible. Okay, I know that was profound. Meditate on it, play this back, listen to that again, then go in front of the mirror and remember what I said. And you'll have an epiphany of self-realization just by looking in the mirror.